Hello, I'm just getting Servane online now. We're about to go live with our session, What Can We Learn from Sustainability? I can see Servane. I've sent you an invite. If you click it, you should come in. I'll send you another one just in case. Sometimes you have to send them twice. This system can be a little bit tricky, except there we go. Servane should be appearing anytime now. So in this session, it's a continuation of the ad hoc sessions. Oh, sorry about this. I'm having to press multiple accepts of Servane because the system's being a little bit temperamental today. This is part of a series of ad hoc sessions. And in this particular session, as I said, we're going to focus on science fiction. So it'll be a conversation between Servane and I, I'm sorry about this. It's saying she's unable to join. So I'm going to send her another invite and we'll see if we can get her up again. I don't know why this happens. It's happened a few times before when we've had these sessions. I invite someone, they send me an invitation, we accept, and then it doesn't come up. Oh, there she is. Brilliant. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. That's why I wanted to catch up with you 10 minutes before, because every time we got the same
stuff. I know. I've had more connection problems, but that's this glitch thing that's happening right now is more, we've had this ever since we started these sessions, and I have no idea what it is, but sometimes if you send someone a connection, they ping in. Other times I had like 4 connection requests from you and I sent you like 4 and it wasn't connecting. So
never mind, let's crack on. Let's crack on.
Great.
Lisa, how do you define science fiction, just for the sake of our understanding and everybody's understanding?
Yeah, that's a good question. So science fiction, obviously there are many different fiction genres, but science fiction is fiction that effectively is inspired by science. So it may not be accurate to science. We see a lot of science fiction, for example, films that are very unscientifically accurate, whereas at the other end of the spectrum some are, but in every case essentially it's artists, it's filmmakers that have seen a scientific concept and they've taken inspiration from it.
Right. So you really teased me when you started with saying let's talk about that, because there were some not incidents but some things happening online or that, you know, that, okay, events, situational building that claim they are bringing science fiction now in the present, and that made you mad, right?
You're referring to the article I wrote on, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're in a period when lines are being blurred, because effectively science fiction is not meant to be taken verbatim. You're not meant to look at science fiction as an individual and think this is exactly how it might look, or this is how we should create a city. Indeed, much science fiction is actually created as a warning. So many of the very best science fiction authors have effectively used text or film or whatever it is as a theatre to help you imagine the worst case scenarios or just different scenarios, and effectively it's a tool. But what we found in futures in particular is that a lot of people mistake that tool as being a blueprint. They think that, you know, just because they've seen these images, sometimes very convincing images, that we should build that. And that is reflected in a lot of future city plans. And it's very obvious to those people that are very science fiction literate, as are the flaws, but that is not something that is detailed enough in the press and that there is enough awareness of.
That's really interesting, because I love that you come from a biofuturism point of view. There is the architecture and everything, and the funny thing is that I come from a behavior sort of behavior attitudes point of view, and that marries in such a lovely way when we have our exchanges. I just, for the sake of this little conversation that we have, I brought with me books. God, I've got my Goodreads open just in front of me. But anyway, so I've got 4 titles very quickly, because obviously we haven't got time to cover everything. But there have been really significant for me in my way to, in my understanding of an approach to the future and behavior towards the future, and how you can bring it here to understand and maybe to bend it.
Yeah.
And so the first, and I know, and I talked to the author, and I don't know if you see that reverse. So, well, good God, I don't. Anyway,
it's front for me. Front.
Anyway, it's called. It's a book by Endrisnar Magnason from Iceland. And Andri, if you're listening, and I'll tag you later on. This is such an important opus called Love Star. It's been written early 2000s, and it describes a world. Yeah, I need to share very quickly. It describes a word. I'm in a country that looks like Iceland, but we don't know. It looks like it. And there is a guy called Love Star, is the enigmatic and obsessively driven founder of the Love Star Corporation. See where I'm going?
Yeah.
Unlocked the key to transmitting data via birds' waves, thus freeing mankind from wires and devices and allowing consumerism, technology, and science to run rampant over all aspects of daily life. I'm not going to say more. I will dump the link there. But the thing is, like, when you talk, at some point, if you're just a common mortal, you might have some adverts coming out of your mouth. That was in 2002. He wrote that.
Hell on earth, in other words.
Oh my God. So all the Facebook, the Twitter, and all the behaviors of some CEOs of this world. When you read that now, you feel, that's what's happening now, right? But that was in 2002.
Yeah.
And of course, when time passes by, you see that it's less silly than it looks like. And so it just makes me think more about, I was not too impressed with the technology, but about how people were, for some of them, happy to go along with it. And some others were just, no, I'm not having that, and rebel. And you have that in many other books, like End Time. That was written in the 90s and describing a world in 2007, which was it's a mind craziness, because it's also historical science fiction, which you have almost like with Octavia Butler at the moment with the parable of the talents and oh my God. So I learned a lot about what makes us react and or challenge technology or challenge the status quo. What about you?
I think, I mean, if you go back to the godfather of science fiction, or the man who's classically credited as so, H.G. Wells, although H.G. Wells speaks to and anticipates extraordinary technologies, he effectively anticipates the smartphone. So in one of his short stories, he speaks about a device. In the story, it's actually in an organic form. It's like an egg, but it will enable you to see remotely, to communicate remotely. Now, in effect, it was one of many concepts he had that were inspired by biology, which was a direct result of the, if you like, advent of evolution theory, when it's sort of finally a number of different ideas converged, and Darwin and Wallace and their school finally reached the point of being able to prove that a hypothesis that had actually been, started in its conception by Darwin's grandfather had plausibility. And so H.G. Wells speaks to a lot of very biological, natural sort of ideas, as does Jules Verne, because of simply all of the advancements that were going on within the sort of the earth sciences in their age. But that, yes, they did anticipate a number of technical concepts. But actually, when you read a number of H.G. Wells' works, you realize that this is the product of a man that was living at a time when different constructs of how society should be organized were conflicting, and he's directly dealing with that. And obviously, in the time machine, we have the capitalists, we have the creatures that have effectively no signs of emotion. They're very brutal, but they're highly productive, and they're running what is effectively an industrialized society. And then they're farming these humans in the same way that we farm domestic livestock, and these humans have no concept of what is happening outside of the artificial nature that has been created for them in which they're bred and in which they're harvested. And that was obviously a narrative around all sorts of different social issues, the bourgeoisie versus the working class, capitalism versus Marxism, etc. And he's just one of many authors that uses science fiction as a place to discuss highly controversial issues. Margaret Atwood, another superstar in this genre, that are not very easy to discuss in the present, because as we've seen on Twitter, when you start to challenge political ideologies, you get people fighting, you get people getting very upset. And part of this is because, you know, a lot of the political ideas are actually, if you like, very faith-based. So these are things, and they're things that have been socialized into people. So when you challenge their political views or their views about society, about wealth distribution and so forth, you're really getting to the core of who they are. And one of the things that we haven't really seen with science fiction, but we could in theory, and it'd be really interesting as an experiment, would be ways in which we examine how we really challenge that, you know, conquer by division, that construct within society. Is it possible that we actually bring together these different views in a way that extracts the very best elements of them while rejecting the worst? Because every construct has its virtues, and vice versa, it has its evils. So, you know, is that possible? But we haven't really seen that, but we have certainly seen innumerable books that to different degrees have explored why society is like it is, and have conveyed some very strong views on that through the creative lens.
So that's interesting what you say, and then I'm bradishing the end time again, because in which a character that has more left-wing ideas, left-wing from, you know, the US back in the days, well, in the future, you get me.
Yeah.
But from within this bubble was able to deconstruct the various movements from within the bubble. And it was also someone who was the main hero of the story was also someone who's anti-war, so could explain that in a very, you know, with poised, what was good, bad, or, you know, and could also deconstruct various fringes, various movements within the sort of a wide left-wing movement. The thing is, when things need to happen, when they need to activate this, then suddenly it gets into acts of war and acts of what other people call terrorism, and so behaviors as well change, and then your views change, and then suddenly everything becomes murky and not as binary. And so, if anything, I think is that these pieces of art and imagination or bringing us is that big lesson to me in my experience was that there's no such thing as binary thinking or binary life. And I would maybe ask you, like, it's like in nature, right? There's no binary.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, in the real world, if we would sort of step out of science fiction and into the real world, absolutely, you know, there's cause and effect going on all the time, and the only sort of variance is the degree. I think with science fiction, like all the arts, is effectively about concentrating and creating a very succinct way of conveying very complex constructs. That's what art does really well. That is why science fiction is so very useful, because if you take climate change, obviously we've had copious reports, copious technical documents that discuss, and sometimes in great accuracy, what the impacts of carbon emissions and various other human actions will be.
Yeah.
And yet they didn't make the push through. But what science fiction has enabled us to do is to see that window on those possible future worlds. And it's always fast track. So if we think of something like The Day After Tomorrow, in reality, although that was actually the idea of the Gulf Stream shutting down and the fact that it would have catastrophic impacts on weather systems for human civilization and life and certain other species, obviously it was fast track because the author, if you like, of that film was trying to achieve a lot and convey something, you know, complex in a 2 hour or whatever it was time frame. So I think when we read science fiction, we have to be very aware of the artistic license. There is often a real kernel of truth in there, multiple kernels of truth. And the great thing about science fiction, and this is where, if you like, the science element, I think, really adds to science, is often when you read a science fiction book or you watch a science fiction film, you will notice more and more details, more and more details. And then when you get into the really sophisticated level of analysing science fiction films, so for example, if you were to look at the way in which a film like Contact or Jurassic Park has been, the cinematography and the way in which it's been put together, they are both the original Jurassic Park. I'm not talking about the later ones. They are profoundly sophisticated, and that they are drawing on human psychology. The level of symbolism is so subtle that although your subconscious is responding to many, many cues within just one scene in some instances, you don't even realize, but you get the sense of what's happening. And they're all building on the classic architectures of stories, because of course human stories have a set of several very consistent architectures from, as far as we know, the advent of writing. So understanding how humans think, understanding how to trigger human emotions, really it is the human and the heart and the head that is at the heart of every good science fiction story. And the ones bad just don't get that. So yeah, when you read science fiction, you should always, or when you watch science fiction, you should always be thinking about, what are they trying to say about the human condition? What is the message here? What can we take away from that? Because everything else that's going on is usually, it's the decoration. It's not there. It doesn't matter what the building looks like. It doesn't matter if they're using a laser gun or I don't know, some other.
That's interesting what you say. If I may, that one of the, I mean, I've taken my son to see Black Panther, the second iteration, which was a joy to see visually. Beautiful people, beautiful scenery, etc. But the funny thing is that there is a detail in some scenes where you see the typical American. I don't know if you've seen. Have you seen it?
I've not seen Black Panther 2.
Wait, just summary. There is a scene at the beginning where some just random American people in a submarine base feel they get attacked by some sort of beings, but what they do is they come out with the little guns. Yeah. And that's what it means, because you can put them anywhere in the world, anywhere. There's always, and of course they just dive into abysmal insignificance in the rest of the movie. There is something more important going on. I say, oh my God, no. But I thought that was a highly humoristic and a very quite sad moment. But I took it like, you're joking. They're coming out with the little guns to find something that's much more complex than that. You know? Really oh my God. And so that made me, it just, interestingly, I'm just going on to what you were saying. Yes, what was at play was much bigger than that. It still managed to put the Americans with their little guns. And so the lesson says that you can't just solve everything by your natural patterns. You cannot just envisage something like a crisis using usual patterns. When I hear people say history is repeating, I say, well, no, it looks like it, but it never repeats. The circumstances will change, the context always change, people's mindset shifts. No one a situation is identical. And I think that, if anything, science fiction also teaches by the imagination and a profusion of nuances that it's not the same. There is a difference. Now spot the differences and look now back in the present to spot the same, you know, these differences. What is it that you notice that's just not the same? It might look so small, but it makes the whole difference.
Yeah, what do you think? I think that sort of element of the film is really clever, because effectively that's an analogy that you could use for climate change, and biodiversity loss, when people sort of, for example, think that planting a tree is the answer to solving the climate crisis. That is the equivalent of coming out with a little gun in the face of this huge monster. So yeah, I mean, I think science fiction's really great at doing that. I would say another thing that really good science fiction always picks up on is the fact that although, you know, technology as a species, as a creature, we are reliant on technology. We would not exist now without forms of technology of various kinds. However, at the level of the emotion, for as long as we have, again, records of the human emotion, for as long as we can, certainly within the written text, identify how we have felt as creatures, how we have responded and reacted to other people around us, we've remained consistent. So in that way, we are very consistent in the way that we love. We are very consistent in the way that we feel threatened and the way that we respond. That's not to say that everybody has the same you know, preferences in love. That's not to say that we all have the same sexuality or anything like that, but it's to say that we all fundamentally as a creature have very particular patterns in our behavior that are there. And we now, of course, know now that even before we have the written record, we have the earlier oral records, which we're now learning to understand in a lot more detail, because we're able to compare and contrast oral records from around the world and do, even, you know, with artificial intelligence, start to do some really sophisticated analyses of these pre-linguistic forms of human communication. But together with that, of course, we have things like burial sites, and we have other things that convey how humans have felt, and again, what their tendencies are. And so, you know, humans as a species at the level of the heart, we do actually show patterns. We do respond to crises in very similar ways. That's why the advent of heightened conflict in the face of climate change was anticipated, it was modelled. And so awful though it is, you know, I'm not surprised to see the conflict in Ukraine. I'm not surprised to see conflict rising around the world. That doesn't mean it's any easier to swallow, but we are reverting to habit. But this is against a backdrop of having many different tools. And I think the thing that is scary for humans, again, is how how science fiction can be useful to us. The scary thing now is that we have weapons and we have technologies that are so profoundly powerful that they give us a level of agency, an individual's level of agency, that was unthinkable in the past, other than in the possession of the gods. That is the difference. And so from the level of science fiction, again, I think that's a really interesting place to explore the human condition. The way I've done that in my science fiction writings is to think of it at the individual level. It gets more complex when you are dealing at societal levels.
That's interesting what you're saying, and in a context where human species finds itself always beyond nature, which is a part of, but it finds always, since the Enlightenment, always separated itself from it, and so was always found itself so good and so superior. And then, as you can say, as you said, the acquiring weapons or instruments that really decuplate or multiply by God knows how much their power or their stupidity or harmfulness, then it's really dangerous. Octavia Butler, again, in this in Kindred and all the books, is very comfortable, and in some of the books, some of the series, is very comfortable in including other species, and some species are mixed up with humans, and there's a level of comfort in just having all these species together. Some are not quite comfortable interacting with each other, but some are. And that reminds us as well that of our internal power and the power that others have, and even within some different branches, and even the human species, it's some living condition that makes them even more harmful to others, etc., etc. And so I love Octavia Butler for that in her writings. And again, she wrote stuff throughout her life that were highly anticipatory, and then we see happening now. Oh my God! But she always teaches that it's like, okay, when we have these weapons and these instruments, we're highly harmful, and we don't even realize how harmful we are. And that she brings the other species around and to that help you consider your position. This is really, really fascinating. To build sustainable worlds, I think having a level of humility is, well, that's good medicine, I think.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think
to an end. What's your word of conclusion?
Yeah, I think the interplay between humans and other species is another very interesting element of science fiction. And there are the two basic narratives. You have the alien narrative, wherein the intelligence and the capabilities of another species, a species that, like humans, is highly advanced, is very threatening. And that's a very common theme in science fiction. I think it's done particularly well in the Alien series, because effectively what the creators of the series are not saying is, they're not making a moral judgment. They're not saying that this, you know, barbaric as it is, this you know, ghastly species is not necessarily better than the humans. It's actually it's very sophisticated, it's very clever, but it's a different kind of intelligence, and it's sort of juxtaposing these two. But it's a common theme in terms of it being a monster. It's a monster and it's hidden, and that actually, although it can be read literally, it's often a way of masking what's actually a much deeper debate, again, about different clashes of ideologies and of psychology, of fear, and of why and how we fear things. And then, of course, you've got, in effect, what is an ancient, but a genre that recently has not been explored enough, or not in science fiction. It has in lots of other fiction, but not science fiction, which is the idea of actually working with nature, harnessing nature, that reciprocal relationship, symbiotic relationship. And that's very interesting because of the fact that we know that those that are open to understanding other kinds of intelligence, to accepting that there is intelligence in mycorrhizal and root networks, fungal networks, that animals are sentient and they have their own kind of intelligence. We know that psychologically, at the level of their, literally the functionality of their brains, we know that the people that are open to that have very particular traits. They will be typically intelligent, they're very good at joining the dots. Their level of fear of change will be quite low. And that is a narrative that has not been explored enough in science fiction, particularly given the fact that we know many of the solutions to human problems and world problems in the wider sense, they lie in nature. But in order that you recognize those and you fund and you empower those solutions and their acquisition, you need to accept this, you know, lateral distribution, if you like, of intelligence. And that's very threatening to those who've got a very you know, a fearful of change, and particularly to hierarchical structures. And you will also find, I mean, if you look at the way that people are treated, people have been treated like animals in the very recent history. You know, we know Brooklyn Zoo exhibited you know, peoples from African tribes in cages in very recent history. We know that even today we're only just at the point at which different kinds of human culture and human living, indigenous intelligence, is really starting to be acknowledged. It's still niche, but it's happening.
We need some more work. We need so much more work. I want to acknowledge Katie and Imran, who joined us today, who are people who connect the dot and really nimble and really transdisciplinarian like you, and are so at ease with this kind of topics. And so thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Melissa. It's time to go, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I've lost track of time, so I'm glad you're on the
You could speak forever. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And yeah, thank you for bringing up those excellent books. There are so many good books, aren't there? But I think you chose a couple of great reads for those that want to delve more into the potential of science fiction to illuminate possible futures.
I wonder if yeah, I'll find a way to share them. And hi, Katie. Yeah, I'll find a way to share them someplace. So feel free to let me know where they're best placed. Yeah.
We could put some in the comments section and invite anyone that sees this to add their recommended books.
Oh, cool.
It's
beautiful.
And everyone who watches.
Thanks everyone who are live now and people who watch later. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.